You probably think you know the story of Albert Camus' The Stranger, right? A guy commits a random murder on a beach, he gets sentenced to death, end of story. But what if I told you that's not the whole story? What if the official record, the version we all learned, is actually a cover-up for something much deeper? Let's reopen this case file.
I mean, the whole thing seems pretty open and shut, but we have to ask the one question that changes everything. Did Meursault really die because he committed murder? For years, we've just accepted the verdict, but some fresh analysis suggests we might have been looking at the wrong crime this whole time.
The court records, they tell one version of events, but if you start looking between the lines, at all the little clues hidden right there in the text, a totally different, way more complicated story starts to unfold. So today, we're going to peel back the layers of this classic and treat it like a cold case. Okay, so every good investigation has to start with the official record. Before we dig for clues, let's just lay out the basic facts as they were presented. This is the official story. On the surface, it all seems so simple. The undisputed facts are these. A French-Algerian man, Meursault, is on a super hot beach. He shoots and kills an Arab man. Then he's arrested, put on trial, and sentenced to death. A straightforward case, right? Well, this official narrative, it's just our starting point.
All right, let's get into our first major piece of evidence. This is a clue that suggests the prosecution completely missed who or what the real target was.
And you know who gives us this clue? Meursault himself. When he's describing that moment, he barely talks about the man he's about to shoot. Instead, he's obsessed with the sky. Just listen to this. It seemed to me that the sky opened up from end to end to rain down fire. You see, the real aggressor in this scene, for him, wasn't the man, it was the sun.
So what's the big deal about the sun? Well, according to some really smart analysis from scholars like Choi Yun-ju, the sun here is this huge symbol. It represents everything oppressive. The law, authority, fate itself, basically everything Meursault has been quietly fighting against his whole life.
Thinking about it that way completely reframes the whole scene. When Meursault pulls that trigger, he's not just shooting at some guy. No, he's firing back at this blinding, crushing force that's bearing down on him. So the trigger wasn't pulled on a man, it was pulled on an entire system.
And that means his real crime, the thing that actually kicks all this off, wasn't murder. It was rebellion. From this perspective, Meursault isn't a murderer at all. He's a sun slayer.
Okay, so we've re-examined the crime scene. Now let's follow Meursault into the courtroom, because our next clue reveals something pretty sinister, how the justice system literally manufactured a monster.
So, if his real crime was rebellion, why was he on trial for murder? Or maybe a better question is, what was Meursault truly on trial for? Because when you look at it, the murder itself was barely even a footnote in his own case.
Just take a look at the prosecution's case, broken down here by the analyst Bian Kwang-bai. On one side you have the murder, yeah, they talked about it, but it wasn't the main event. On the other side you have what became the real case against him. He didn't cry at his mother's funeral, he went on a date the next day, he saw a comedy. This is what they used to convict him. They weren't prosecuting an action, they were prosecuting a personality.
And the proof is right there in the prosecutor's big closing argument, the line that seals Meursault's fate. Gentlemen of the jury, the day after his mother's death, this man was swimming, starting an improper affair, and laughing at a comedy. I have nothing more to say. Did you notice what's missing? The murder is completely gone. It's totally irrelevant.
This tells us everything. The court wasn't interested in the actual man sitting there. They just ignored the real Meursault, this guy who is totally honest about what he feels and he's basically incapable of lying, and instead they created this fake, soulless monster that they could easily point to and condemn.
But why? Why would society need to invent this monster? To get the motive, we have to look way back to an old Greek myth that perfectly explains this kind of social violence. It's time to talk about society's motive, the Procrustean bed.
To really get what was under attack, there's this great academic term, diaphora. Scholar Bian Kwang-bai uses it to describe that unique, individual spark that makes you, well, you. It's your essence. And the court didn't just ignore Meursault's diaphora, they made it their mission to completely erase it.
And you can see that transformation so clearly right here. On the left, that's the real Meursault, a guy who is just true to what his senses tell him, who doesn't fake emotions he doesn't feel. And on the right, that's the monster the court created, cold-blooded, antisocial, morally corrupt. They took his authenticity and twisted it into something monstrous.
Which brings us to this idea of the Procrustean bed. It comes from this Greek myth about a thief who'd make travelers lie in his iron bed. If they were too short, he'd stretch them on a rack. If they were too tall, he'd just chop off their limbs. It's a brutal but perfect metaphor for how society demands conformity, violently forcing everyone to fit its one-size-fits-all standard.
And Mirso was a man who simply refused to fit the bed. He wouldn't lie about how he felt. He wouldn't perform sadness just because he was supposed to. He wouldn't play their social games. And since society couldn't stretch him or change him, it did the only other thing it could. It cut him down.
So, let's bring all these clues together and deliver our final verdict in this reopened case. This is the verdict: a martyr for truth.
And you know, who better to confirm our entire investigation than the author himself? Albert Camus actually wrote, "In our society, any man who doesn't cry at his mother's funeral risks being sentenced to death." He's telling us flat out, the trial was never, ever about the murder.
Mirsaw's execution wasn't punishment for a crime. It was society's ultimate response to a man it couldn't control. It was the system striking back against his rebellion on the beach and his authenticity in the courtroom. He wasn't a threat because he killed someone. He was a threat because he insisted on living his own truth.
And that brings us to one final, huge question. When you think about it that way, was Mirso actually defeated? Sure, he lost his life, but did he lose the battle?
And the answer, really, is no. By accepting death, instead of pretending to be someone he wasn't, he actually achieved a totally different kind of victory. He became a martyr. He chose to die rather than live a lie, defending his own personal truth against the world that was built on falsehoods. And that, right there, is the hidden truth of the murder trial of the stranger.